Greetings and welcome back. It's your host, Gabe Morales. We're continuing with our coverage of the California State Prison at Sacramento County, aka New Folsom. In January 1996, major fighting occurred in B facility involving 150 inmates. I understand that this mostly involved blacks and sureños. About 8 months later, in September 1996, violence erupted again when 13 inmates were injured, with 17 shots being fired by officers, one which struck and killed an inmate. This skirmish also involved blacks and sureños. At approximately 9 a.m. in the morning, shortly after they were released out to the big main exercise yard, prisoners battled each other with handmade knives and other weapons. 8 were later treated for stab wounds, and 4 officers sustained minor injuries when responding. Staff needed 30 to 40 minutes to quell the riot. Now, when I was working the gun back in the late 80s and 90s, we used a Mini 14 for the yard. And like I said, there were supposed to be no warning shots on the yard or inside the units. But I guess times have changed, and officers now need to go through a use of force continuum before they're allowed to use the major firepower. Well, by then it's usually too late, and somebody ends up getting badly hurt or killed. I've stated several times before, it was only because inmates knew that they would get shot within seconds that they often didn't act. And contrary to opinion, most officers were not trigger happy. So I believe the big guns actually prevented a lot of the violence that we're seeing today within the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation. In September 1996, I understand that officers fired numerous warning shots with rubber bullets, and then followed by 15 rounds of the real stuff. It was the worst violence in California prisons since 1989, when I believe it was again Sureños and Mexican Mafia associates versus blacks of all gangs on B Yard. Basically, it's a war between the Crips and Southern California Mexicans, said the wife of one inmate after the September 1996 riot. And she stated that it wasn't a big secret that the fight was coming. I remember the rumor going around was that a Sureño was buying dope from blacks and got slapped, which many others point out does not make a lot of sense because you're supposed to only buy drugs from your own race to avoid a race war over such a misunderstanding. And some feel that it doesn't matter. You cannot get punked. You cannot get slapped and not fight back. That is considered an act of cowardice, and that inmate would be attacked by his own for not standing up for himself. Others say that it wouldn't matter. If one Sereno gets attacked, then all will jump in immediately, then deal later with the reasons why it occurred, and severely punish one of their own by checking him, maybe even stabbing him, if an investigation by the shotcallers find that is warranted.
At Folsom State Prison today, northeast of Sacramento, mass violence broke out between 2 rival prison gangs. 1 man died and many others were injured. Prison guards fired live bullets to break up the riot in the exercise yard. Bob McKenzie reports.
Folsom Prison is divided into 3 facilities. This morning's riot broke out shortly after 9 o'clock among prisoners in the recreation yard of B facility. And the result was this. Injuries that strained ambulance services to the limit. 1 prisoner was killed, 13 more were wounded and rushed to Davis Medical Center. Of those men, 8 were stabbed by other prisoners. 5 were shot by prison guards. No guards were wounded, but 4 were injured, 2 seriously enough to require medical attention. About 300 prisoners were in the yard when the disturbance began. 9 guards were also there. What prison officials called a dispute broke out between black and Chicano prisoners. The fight widened until at least 100 prisoners were involved. Prison guards tried to break up the melee. Guards in the yard do not carry lethal weapons. They do carry 37-millimeter rubber baton guns.
It's a projectile that is aimed at the inmate about 3 feet away from the melee or from the incident, and it just rebounds.
Do you know if that was used here?
Yes, it was.
And then there was warning shots from above?
There were warning shots, yes.
And then shots were fired into the
shots were fired. I don't know how many at this time. I have from 15 to 17 shots.
Prison officials said the man who died was shot in the buttocks, but it was not yet clear whether that was the cause of his death. The 8 men with stab wounds ran up against fellow prisoners wielding shivs, handmade knives, and stabbing implements.
They're very creative. They're able to melt down plastic or maybe gather weapon stock such as pieces of metal, sharpen a toothbrush.
Folsom was built to house men who have committed the most serious crimes, and its population includes prisoners considered the most violence-prone.
I remember this first occurred during the time that the Bulldogs took over the yard at C facility, as I mentioned last video, and guys like Roy Spooky Vindiolo from B facility made an alliance with the Sureños and Mexican Mafia to go against the Norteños and the NF. That has long since changed. The whites would usually stick up for themselves, but often were backed up by the Sureños. As I explained in my Nuestra Familia videos, the NF had virtually been eliminated in Southern California by the mid-1980s. But around the late 1980s, the Sureños started pushing hard into Northern California. There were always Mexican Mafia members from Northern California since its inception in the late 1950s, but there were very few of them. Around the late 1980s, the Sureños pushed hard into Northern California. Folsom Prison had a lot of Mexican Mafia members or associates, so some of their families moved to be closer with them for visitation purposes. I remember being shown that there was an inmate-controlled Section 8 apartments just off of East Natroma Street, near the entrance road to the East Gate. I recall 47th Street Sacra being located near Barrio Franklin Boulevard, and it was the first Sureño clica that I remember seeing in Northern California. Understand that this clica had connects to Santa Rosa Barrio Sur, which had moved into that city, and largely consisted of Mexican National Emmy supporters like Robert Alvarez of Misled Loyalty, and that some younger relatives of the Meros and associates also lived near Q in order to visit their loved ones. And Sureños started planting their flags in other Northern California areas, especially near CDC facilities, where their people were housed. There are some videos out there on YouTube that are very good, and some that are not very accurate. Dubs, who I believe had a J number, which meant that he came into the system right after I left in 1993, claims he was a camarada or an Emmy member at New Folsom. I don't know. Maybe he flew under the radar, but I never heard of him. Yeah, I left CDC in early 1993, thus no longer had direct observation of offenders in that department's custody. But I continued to keep tabs on gang members after I left, as the official gang contact liaison King County Jail, frequently following up on Cali street and prison gang members that landed in Washington State facilities. I communicated with multiple agencies down there and sometimes even attended California Prison Gang Task Force meetings. According to him, he was in A5 VCU A section, where I frequently worked, in a bottom tier bedrock cell, which means you have a concrete slab for a bed. That particular section was virtually all hardcore prison gang members. There are also a couple of bedrock cells over in A6, which is where AB member Cornfed Schneider was housed when I worked there, as mentioned in my last video. To his credit, he has a lot of views and subscribers, telling some good stories from a convict's perspective about New Folsom, if you want to check out his content. Pero de veras, I don't always agree with him, as I always advised new correctional officer recruits at the Washington State Academy when I was a TAC officer. I could teach them a lot, but I could not teach them to care about their jobs and about their reputation throughout their career. Chale. We were not high-paid babysitters, nor robocops. We were not respectful, not going out of our way to mess with inmates who were not in major violation of the rules. As I mentioned in my last video, I viewed myself as a correctional peace officer, proactive prison cop, not like the old guard mentality. I carried myself with dignity and respect with my fellow staff as well as offenders, and I did the same when I moved over to the classification section during my many years at the King County Jail. Continued working in this manner during my short stint as a shift commander / lieutenant at a privately ran federal ICE detention facility in Tacoma, Washington. Now, there is no doubt there were some guards that were always overbearing, some who were corrupt, some who were lazy and only reactionary, who slowly acted to pick up the pieces when shit broke off. I mentioned this all in my Green Wall video, but contrary to the guard mindset, most were firm, fair, and consistent. Como dices, Dubs, no disrespect. On May 20th, 2011, a large riot broke out again at New Folsom. I understand this incident started just after 10 a.m. when two inmates began fighting with each other. The fight then escalated, and approximately 150 inmates were eventually involved. At least two inmates were stabbed multiple times and taken outside for hospital treatment during that incident. In September 2012, another riot occurred at approximately 11:17 a.m. A prisoner was shot and wounded, and 12 others were sent to the hospital with stab and slash wounds, as well as head trauma, during a riot that involved approximately 60 inmates. The staff fired 6 rounds during their efforts to stop the fighting, and afterwards, 4 weapons were retrieved by officers. On August 12, 2015, during outside rec time at approximately 1 p.m., longtime BGF member Hugo Yogi Pinell was killed. After he was hit, 70 inmates were involved in rioting that occurred between whites and blacks.
New Folsom Prison near Sacramento is under extra close watch tonight after 70 inmates rioted this afternoon. Betty Yu shows us when the dust settled, one of California's most notorious prisoners was dead.
His friends called him Yogi Bear, a name that hardly suggests the convicted rapist he was, or the convict who was part of the San Quentin Six, the men who slashed the throats of 3 guards at Quentin in a dramatic escape attempt back in 1971. All these years later, Hugo Pinell ended a long spell of solitary confinement. Today, in the exercise yard at New Folsom Prison, another con shanked him, and he died.
Pinell, age 71, had recently been released from the security housing units and had a very long rap sheet of violence. He was part of this infamous San Quentin Six, involved in the deadly 1971 attack at San Quentin's Adjustment Center, covered in several previous videos, whereby 6 people were killed, 3 staff, 2 trustees, and which left BGF icon George Jackson dead as he tried to escape out the AC, according to CDC authorities. Though the BGF still claims that was all a setup. He also killed a guard at Soledad prior to that bloody incident, which is the reason why he was placed in the AC at that time. Pinell was killed on orders of the Aryan Brotherhood, since he had long been on their hit list. As stated in the video, 70 inmates were involved in the rioting that occurred between whites and blacks, but it is my understanding that there were actually 2 hitmen involved, Waylon Pritchford and Jason Weaver. December 12, 2019, that 3 inmates were cuffed up in the day room, identified as Anthony Rodriguez and Cody Monster Taylor, and I was told that both were part of a renegade offshoot of the Northern Riders called Nuestra Cosa, aka 14-3, for the 14th and 3rd letter of the alphabet, started by Alex Scrappy Diaz from San Jose. The Nuestra Cosa group had broken off from the Northern Riders after Scrappy Diaz had problems with Northern Rider founder Maurice Snoop Vasquez. Anyways, they are shown on the unit video running up the chair to get Shanks, then came back and killed Luis Giovanni Aguila, who I understand belonged to the rival Sensitive Needs Yard gang 25s, or Pesetas, who is seated and still in restraints, thus was left defenseless. I'm not sure why the control officer didn't shoot in that incident. Monster later claimed that the unit guards were corrupt and knew that they had knives on them. I don't know, but I'm sure that was another lawsuit. So much for CDC working to save the taxpayers' money by letting so many dangerous prisoners out on the streets. On May 7, 2022, 4 convicts at New Folsom killed Camilo Baños Lopez, who was attacked on the recreation yard and died a short time later from his injuries. I'm not sure about the circumstances in that incident, but he must have been a high priority target to have a 4-man hit team put on him. Mexican Mafia shotcaller Michael Mosca Torres began his stay at New Folsom in December 2007. By 2016, Torres had seized control of the Los Angeles County jail system, operating from his New Folsom prison cell. This was following a power struggle by various Mexican Mafia members who ran the LA County Jail after the death of Eulalio Lalo Martinez from Lomas, when he died of a heroin overdose in June 2013. As mentioned previously, Mosca had controlled the jail as well as the San Fernando Valley when he was housed there in 2003-2007, fighting his attempted murder case. Oh, I forgot to mention, Jose Fox Landa Rodriguez was one of those individuals that took over operations for La M in the LA County Jail. I had Fox A5 VCU A section during the early 1990s when he was just a camarada, but was a main communications contact for them. All the huilas on the upper tier went through him. Fox had connections to Michoacan drug cartels, but later fell from power. I probably need to do a separate video on all that and how it connects to Mara Salvatrucha and old Emero Rupsolo. As I've mentioned previously, Mosca had very close ties to the AB. An investigation started in 2014 targeting members of the Vallejo-based family affiliate Irish Mafia and AB support group found that female FAME member Gianna Quisenberry had communications directly with AB shotcaller Ronald Renegade Yandel for trafficking heroin and meth. Authorities then obtained a search warrant to tap Yandel's contraband phone in the summer of 2016 and say that they recorded up to 1,800 calls, which provided evidence about all kinds of murder plots, heroin and meth trafficking, and that Yandel directed other crimes about the gang's business. He still had a cell phone last I checked that he makes videos on, and like Two Scoops Daniel, frequently criticized CDC operations and their treatment of him. In 2019, Mosca had been indicted alongside more than a dozen AB members and associates in a major RICO case, as mentioned in previous videos. In particular, he was close to AB General Ronnie Yandel and was accused of conspiring with AB leaders to distribute heroin within CDC facilities. Torres was initially housed in Ad Seg, but served as his own pro se attorney and wrote several motions demanding to be replaced back into general population. Federal authorities rebutted the motion, arguing that Torres was a danger to others, and noted that he had been caught with a handcuff key during a cell search, and that he also been caught with a huila, a note to another inmate discussing heroin sales and apparently a dispute over money owed him. In July 2023, Mexican Mafia shotcaller Michael Mosca Torres, who had a reputation for generating a lot of revenue for the gang, was stabbed to death at New Folsom. This was a sanctioned hit, and it was carried out by fellow prisoners Juan Martinez, a known Sureño, and Ray Cisco Martinez, an MS shotcaller, who attacked Mosca around 9:20 a.m. He sustained multiple stab wounds and was taken to an outside medical facility while life-saving measures were performed, but he was announced dead at approximately 10:30 a.m. January 15, 2025, Cody Monster Taylor, the Nuestra Cosa member previously involved in the killing of the 2-5 Peseta at New Folsom, was involved in yet another homicide, this time working with David Gomez, who was out of L.A. This assault occurred out on the main yard at approximately 5:07 p.m., which is, as I recall, about the time they would start getting dark there in Sacramento. Both then killed inmate Mario Campbell, who was from the Sacramento area. CDC states that Gomez had previously been involved in a murder at a prison in Monterey County and was sentenced to life without the possibility of parole in January of 2015. 3 inmate manufactured weapons were found at the scene. To me, this is yet another example for the need for a security housing unit for long-time isolation of violent repeat offenders, and it is my opinion that neither one of these killers should have been let out on the main line. And this past spring, March 5th, 2025, 5 inmates were injured after a riot involving approximately 40 prisoners just prior to 10 a.m. on New Folsom's A yard, which has been a PC yard ever since it opened. But as I've stated before, just because they're SNY does not mean they don't engage in violence. There is still a lot of violence that happens at level 4 facilities, including New Folsom. As I stated in my last video, I was just down in Southern California visiting family and teaching on the Aryan Brotherhood in YouTube for law enforcement just about a week ago. I enjoy sharing the knowledge of what I know, but I definitely don't know it all. I'm still learning and try to keep an open mind. I have reviewed hundreds of C-files and kept tabs on prison gangs since the late 1970s. Yes, almost 50 years now. Maybe you learned something from my research here and my outlook from an officer's perspective. Or maybe not. If you liked it, I would appreciate a like and subscribe. For people who have been with me for a while now, I do appreciate your positive feedback and comments. I'll be back soon for more overviews of specific CDC prisons. For now, this is Gabe Morales signing off for Gangsters, Cops, and Politicians.